work, parenting, and Buddhahood. Let's begin with Buddhahood. The other thing is I have no idea what Buddhahood is. That's the other thing. Like you might be thinking, like, why are you talking then? So Buddhahood. The Buddha, he. Have you hands up if you know nothing whatsoever about the Buddha or Buddhism? So you all okay? Yeah, that's good. So the Buddha was just a man who lived a long time ago, like over 2,500 years ago. Just an ordinary human being, and the way he described it, he awoke to reality. And in that awakening, there was a big release of energy and creativity and love and compassion for all living beings. And after his awakening, he just started wandering in India, teaching people. And he had such a profound effect on people. And the more I learn about him, the more I think about him, the more he has a big impact on me. And the more I think, wow, what an incredible man. Like he would meet with people, with anyone, from merchants to kings to religious, holy people that were homeless, just wandering around the jungle, look, anyone. And he would have a big impact on people. And then, because he had such a big impact on people, a lot of them decided to follow him. They gave their lives to following his teachings, and then they wrote about him. They wrote poems and stories about him. And then a whole tradition, the whole Buddhist tradition, has come down to us, down the generations throughout many countries and many centuries. And so Buddhism has this beautiful wealth of works of art, works of literature, as well as painting and sculpture and all of that. And all of that is sort of trying to give you a sense, an impression of what the Buddha was like and what Buddhahood is like. Like you cannot really say in words what it is, but you can evoke it. You can sort of get a glimpse of it from these beautiful works of art. And a lot of these works of art that they're called suttas or sutras. They're literature, Buddhist literature. And one of them, so some of them are very close to the time of the Buddha, some of them are in time, that is, and some of them were written a long time after the Buddha. And all of them refer back to the Buddha, either in a very down-to-earth way or in a very grandiose, cosmic sort of way. So I'm going to read you a little bit of the latter. So the Buddha is staying near a great big city in India, and then he gets visited by 500 young people from the great city of Vaishali. And each one of them gives the Buddha a parasol, a little umbrella made with jewels. 7 kinds of jewels, that's another tradition. So 7 kinds of jewels. It's really these really beautiful parasols. So each one of them, 500, the Buddha there, he's sitting in the forest near the city, and in turns, each one of them presents this great beautiful parasol to the Buddha. As soon as these precious parasols had been laid down, suddenly, by the miraculous power of the Lord, they were transformed into a single precious canopy so great that it had formed a covering for this entire billion-world galaxy. The surface of the entire billion-world galaxy was reflected in the interior of the great precious canopy, where the total content of this galaxy could be seen. Limitless mansions of suns, moons, stellar bodies, realms of all kinds of beings, as well as the realms of the 4 great kings, the kings of mountains, and then he names all the different kinds of mountains, all great oceans, rivers, bays, torrents, streams, brooks, and springs. Finally, all the villages, suburbs, cities, capitals, provinces, and wildernesses. All these could be clearly seen by everyone. And the voices of all the Buddhas in the 10 directions could be heard proclaiming the teaching of the Dharma. Dharma is the teaching of the Buddha. in all the worlds. The sounds reverberating in space beneath the great precious canopy. At this vision of the magnificent miracle effected by the supernatural power of the Lord Buddha, the entire host was ecstatic, enraptured, astonished, delighted, satisfied, and filled with awe and pleasure. They all bowed down to the Tathagata, another way of calling the Buddha, withdrew to one side, with palms pressed together. They gazed upon him with fixed attention. The reason why I want to read that, I'm not going to explain any of that, by the way, but the reason why I'm reading that is because it gives you a little bit of a flavor of what, like when you encounter somebody with such power, your mind opens up. Your mind opens up to here is describing in terms of being able to see all the galaxies, all the billion galaxies and the suns and the moons. But I believe you could take it literally, but you could also take it metaphorically and see how the Buddha, if you encounter somebody with the caliber of the Buddha, your mind will open up. If you're under his influence, your mind will open up. So he carried this gravity about him. He was deeply serene and yet really vibrant and creative and sort of electrified. He carried an energy about him that was really electrifying and contagious. So people became really curious, like, who's this man? What, sometimes you meet people and you think, there's something about this person. Don't really know what, but there's something about this person that I want to find out more about them. So I imagine the people who followed the Buddha were a little bit like that. And then he decided to teach them. What's really interesting is that in the records of him talking about shortly after he awoke, he sort of thinks, it's like he assumes he's going to teach, and then he thinks, people are not going to get it. He says, enough now with teaching what only with difficulty I reached. This Dhamma, this reality, is not easily realized by those overcome with aversion and passion. What is abstruse, subtle, deep, hard to see, going against the flow, those delighting in passion, cloaked in the mass of darkness, won't see. What's really interesting about this, I think, is that this revolution of consciousness that he managed to attain is incredibly hard. And what he's pointing to in his own reflections is like, are people really going to get it? So they're so enraptured in their own kind of lives, in their own engaging with life in a very superficial way. Are they really going to get this? And he wasn't convinced. Eventually he had a vision and he realized, yeah, everyone's got the potential to really understand what he understood. So he decided to teach, which is great for us. And he taught in terms of, he used lots of images and concepts and lots of ways of talking about what he was trying to get is for people to see what he saw for themselves. So he couldn't just passed on his experience, that's impossible. It's a little bit like, this metaphor is often used, you see somebody who's really fit, like physically fit, and they can't just make you fit. They could train you. So the Buddha was a little bit like this really incredibly spiritually fit person who said, like, come, I'll train you. But you have to do the hard work, I won't be able to just give you a spiritual six-pack. That's a terrible, 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 terrible metaphor, but you know what I mean. And one of the ways in which he talked about was the Noble Eightfold Path. And there's this path, he used this image of a path of total transformation. So a way of engaging with the world, a way of seeing the world in a way that is like a Buddha would see it, is very subtle. So what's needed really is complete and total transformation of all aspects of yourself. And so the Eightfold Path touches on things like, he starts with a glimpse of reality, so vision, and then he moves on to emotions, speech, the way you talk, the way you express yourself, the way you act in the world, the sort of work that you do and how you do your work, the sort of effort that you put into your life and your work, the sort of awareness that you bring into your life and the work, and every sort of interaction that you have with everyone that you come in contact with. All of that needs to be touched by this vision. And right in there, we find perfect livelihood, or right livelihood, which is this aspect of life which is very kind of unavoidable and important in life, and that most of us spend most of our life doing. So I'll spend a little bit of time unpacking that, and you will soon see the relationship between work and parenting. And I'll talk a little bit about parenting as well. Sangharakshita, who, if you don't know, is the founder of the Triratna Buddhist community and order, he gave a lecture years and years ago, really worth listening to, on the Noble Eightfold Path. And when he gets to this step of perfect livelihood, as he calls it, I'll read you what he says. With this step, or with this stage, though we are also concerned with the transformation of an aspect of ourselves as before, this time there's a difference, a very great difference. So far we have come along this Eightfold Path. We've been concerned with the transformation of ourselves as individuals, with our own individual separate life. But with this step, right livelihood, we are concerned with the transformation of the collective life, not just the individual life, but the collective life, the life of the community, the life of society. Now, this is not an aspect of Buddhism which is usually very much emphasized. In fact, sometimes it's rather played down. But it is very definitely a part of the total teaching, this idea that we should try to transform not just our individual lives, but the community, the society at large, the world at large. And then he goes on to say how the context we live in, the society we live in, inevitably will affect how we behave. It's incredibly important because not only does it have a massive impact on the world, I can see how the cafe is just a tiny little business, small cafe, the way we go about things with a vegetarian cafe, one of our main principles is kindness. So everyone that comes and works in the cafe, I talk to them about one of the main principles of the cafe is being kind to people, being kind to everyone who works there, being kind to customers, suppliers, etc. So kindness as a core value, as a core business value is there. And it has an effect. You have people walk in, there is something about the cafe that is a little bit different from your regular cafe. And it's kind of not for me to say, but there is a difference, and it's very much tangible. And it's the way the cafe started. It very much started with a group of friends, Buddhist friends, with these core values of kindness, generosity, contentment, and wanting to develop as individuals. That is at the core of the business, and that just carries on. Even though not everyone in the cafe is a Buddhist or consciously working on themselves, the fact that the ethos of the cafe is that inevitably has an effect on them, and it has an effect on customers, and people keep coming back and back and back again. So I am so impressed by the amount of regular customers that we have. It's crazy. They come every day, sometimes twice a week, and they can't stay away. Which is amazing. And there is something about work. I was listening to someone, I can't remember their name now, but they're doing a lot of studies about work, and how one of the things they mention is how work, for a lot of people, work has become often the only place where they socialize with others. and often the only way in which they can find purpose and meaning in life, and the only place where they might, if they're lucky, get a sense of community and belonging. You know, a lot of people don't practice any religion anymore. There's no this sense of being part of a tribe or anything like that, particularly in cities. So work, but it's a potential for that. And I think it's really important that we think about work and engage with work in a way that we use it as a context to help ourselves become better human beings, not just better at our work, better human beings, but also to help others. And the more of us bringing that sort of ethos into work, the slightly more enlightened the work that we do will become, and therefore the world we live in. So it's a small way in which we can contribute to societies by bringing our values. I'm assuming if you're in this festival and you come to this talk, you have kindness and generosity and personal development as a kind of core value of your life. And so if you do, then how can you bring those values onto work? Chances are, if you start sort of preaching, that's not going to go really well. So there must be other ways. And this very much ties with this idea of the Buddha field. In Buddhism, we talk about the Buddha field, the creation of the Buddha field, which is what we create here. The Buddha Field Festival, you know, we're trying to create context where people can more easily be creative, be loving, be generous, be kind with each other, where the values are no competitiveness, no hatred, and you know you have to put other people down in order to kind of survive. It's a different ethos. Let's be a community, and that's what the Buddha Field Festival offers. And it's so amazing that we can do that for a week, for a long weekend. In a more cosmic way, there's all these legends of Buddha fields, of Buddhas actually creating spheres of Buddha worlds where enlightenment is possible much more easily because they create a context for people to be really receptive and for their positive qualities to develop. But work is, we can bring that, we can see work as a possibility, as a way of creating Buddha worlds, particularly if you're in a managerial position, particularly if you own a business. You have a lot more freedom to do as you please, if you like, and then if you bring those values onto your business, and there's more and more research being done about how if your work is more human, then obviously that makes sense, and we don't need studies to prove that, but there are a lot of studies that is actually, if you do that, it's good for business as well. It's not just good for people. It's actually good for business. And the Dana Cafe where I work, it is a living example of that. You know, it just gets busier and busier. I'm going to skip a whole bunch of things because we won't have time. So I sort of mentioned some of the basic, I don't like to call them basic, these fundamental amazing principles that the Buddha talked about. So kindness, generosity, I have to read them now, I'm supposed to know them by heart. So so kindness, generosity, stillness, simplicity and contentment, truthfulness or honesty, and a clear mind or wisdom, mindfulness. You can read, so those are called the 5 precepts. If you don't know already that, the 5 precepts are the the strongest sort of principles that you can bring into any context and make it more of a Buddha field, more of a Buddha world. And that's the definition of right livelihood. So it's a livelihood that is not harming other living beings, that is not taking, they're not giving. And ideally, it's contributing to society in a positive way, it's encouraging people to grow as human beings. The message of the companies or the work that you do is kindness, generosity, contentment, etc. And then I can leave you to do the work. What's not a right livelihood is the opposite of that. If what I've said so far is not enough, and what I've introduced so far is not enough, I'm going to introduce another great master of the Middle Ages called Dogen. And I'm going to turn to him because he's very good at just down to earth. I started with something very grandiose and cosmic. Dogen, he's the one who I wrote in the blurb. The one who wrote, I read it to you, so he talks about the work of the cook in a monastery, and the tenso is the cook, that's the title. So for the tenso, for the cook, the mind which finds the way being Buddhahood, if you like, the mind which finds Buddhahood actualizes itself through working with rolled up sleeves. I just really love that quote because I've spent years practicing the Dharma, practicing the Buddha's teachings, and I loved every bit of it. But in some ways, it hasn't been until becoming a parent and really taking responsibility for other human beings that I realized how unenlightened I am. It is only when you have really, when you really come up against your limitations that you really find out where you're at. And, I spent years having lots of time, as you do when you're younger, and you have lots of time in your hands, and if you get into any sort of spirituality, you really go for it, you have lots of time to meditate and go on retreat, and it's amazing, and you can sort of get really big-headed thinking, wow, so spiritual. And then kids come along, burst that bubble, and all of the resources and positivity and enthusiasm and clarity that you build through all those years of practice of meditation, etc., gradually they run out. So I'm talking about myself here. There's this concept of merits that in Buddhism is like you practice really hard and you gather a certain momentum, and you sort of run on that. And life can be like when you start practicing meditation and you start practicing like clear communication and you start practicing any sort of all I know is when you start practicing the Buddha's teaching, your life opens up. Your life starts to open up. Well, the Dharma that the Buddha discovered is very subtle. So you will come up against your limitations. And that's what what the territory that I have entered through becoming a parent is, I started thinking, well, I get it. I get what Buddhahood is. I don't. I really don't. I'm like, I'm like exaggerating here, but I'm beyond all my conditioning. All of my conditioning is behind me now. I can clearly see it. You tell your life story a lot if you go on retreats, and you can indulge yourself in talking about how you grew up and how it affected you and how you've overcome it and etc. Which is great. It's lovely. I don't want to diminish it in any way. I think it's essential work that you actually come to terms with your life. But they're layers. What I find is that they're basically layers. That I was engaging with my life and with the spiritual life here. But there was this layer that wasn't accessible to me, really. And in some ways, it's almost like the more meditation I did, the further away I got from this baseline of children of poo-poo that, that is just part of my being. And so I'm in that. And at this point, I'm kind of lost for words. Like, at this point, I think I keep referring back to the Buddhist teaching because it makes sense. I keep, whenever I can, I meditate, and I keep bringing these basic principles that I talked about, and I keep bringing those are the guiding principles of my life. I keep tapping onto that because that's the life. The lifeblood of my life. If I don't keep tapping onto that, then my life becomes meaningless, and it just becomes this endless stream of activity and demand that would just drive me crazy. And you parents will know what I mean. So Dogen, he talks about this role of the cook. And there's there's four aspects that he talks about. One of them is being incredibly present and meticulous in everything that you do. And from here I kind of swap between, or you might do the work of knowing whether I'm talking about work or parenting. I'm kind of talking about both at this point. And I have been throughout the talk really. So let me read from Dogen. Having received the ingredients for the meals, you must care for them you must care for them as you would the pupils of your own eyes. Get your ingredients, you look after them as if they were your own eyes. Do not leave the washing of the rice or preparing the vegetables to others, but use your own hands, your own eyes, your own sincerity. Do not fragment your attention, but see what each moment calls for. If you take care of just one thing, then you will be careless of the other. Do not miss the opportunity of offering even a single drop into the ocean of merit, or a grain atop the mountain of the roots of beneficial activity. It's like what he's saying is everything you do matters, basically. And how you do it matters. And if your eyes were to popped out, like, you would be so careful with them, wouldn't you? And you know how precious they are, so you'd be so careful with them. So this is what he did. That is that kind of attention that he's pointing at. It's a whole other level of attention. And then he goes on to talk about, like, if you focus too much on one aspect of the kitchen work, then you lose sight of the overall. You're trying to make a meal for 200 people, so you can't afford to just over focus on how you're washing the rice. And yet, you have to completely focus on how to wash the rice, otherwise you'll mess it up. Or how you cook it. So there's this incredible mindfulness that is beyond the kind of mindfulness that we are taught in secular spheres. And that, again, that is very good, and I'm very glad that's coming in. But yeah, so he's saying, and you would know as a parent, you have to, when you're at best, when you're clear-minded, you have a sense of the day and how your child's moods and needs might swing about. And you have to be absolutely present with them. And you know that that's the best thing for them. And if you do manage to do that, then they'll have a meltdown, or they might not, but you're present and you can be available for them. So you have to be absolutely present for them in any single moment. So each moment, you have to be aware of what each moment calls for. and at the same time you have this broad awareness of a whole day, of a whole week, and in a way of their whole life. I remember when my kids, my daughter's 5, she's called Nora, my son is 2, he's called Cosmo. When they were born, there was this burst of reality, if you like, just for a moment. There's these, like, particularly with the first one, it was incredibly long and difficult and painful, and there was lots of drama and moving into different sections from home to different sections of the hospital, and it was very traumatic. And then there's this little creature that I've had to hold her in my arms because my wife was bleeding a lot, so she had to be sorted out. And there's this little being, eyes wide open with the harsh lights of hospitals, just sort of looking around, looking at my face. I had her really close. And it's like everything was in there, the whole universe was in there. A little bit like the reading I did earlier on. I could see in her eyes, I could see all the galaxies in the world, all the suns and moons of the world. In her little body, I could see all the bodies of all living beings, and my own, and my ancestors. And it came with a sense of tremendous power. It's like I was part of creating this miraculous, strange, amazing creature, and yet has nothing to do with me. And I'm entirely responsible for her. So scary. Having this massive responsibility, and yet knowing that I'll have some influence over her, but there's all sorts of things out of my control. So there's this sense of power, surrender, clarity of mind. This is what needs to be done to keep her safe. Everything sort of just kicked in. And the same with Cosmo, it was way less dramatic. He just kind of popped out on the bed at home. We had no one around other than a friend. And that was amazing. But it was the same, like, holding him, like, the same sort of experience. And so there's this clarity of the fragility of life, the preciousness of life. And this is something that Doga turns to, like, one of the things that he says is, carry your work with a joyful mind, knowing that life is precious. And this, again, you probably heard this image, but there's this image, this traditional Buddhist image of this little circle floating around the ocean, and every, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but every few years or so there's a turtle that pops out, and when the neck of the turtle goes into the little circle, that's how precious life is. Very bad way of saying that image, sorry. But life is very precious, and it's very common in a way. We're all born with children are born all the time, and yet it's so incredible and so amazing. So Dogen is very very strict with his disciples. It's like, so being strict and being joyful is kind of like, doesn't quite work. But he's saying, pay attention to the fact that life is precious. And because it's precious, and because every single action that you perform in this world affects your mind, affects the world, do it as carefully as you can. So there's the joyful mind, there's the mindful, attentive mind, and then he talks about the parental mind. A parental mind, or a motherly heart, is a heart which maintains the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, teaching, the Sangha, the community, as a parent cares for a child. A parent raises a child with deep love.
regardless of poverty or difficulties. Their hearts cannot be understood by another. Only a parent can understand it. A parent protects their child from heat or cold before worrying about whether they themselves are hot or cold. This kind of care can only be understood by those who have given rise to it, and realized only by those who practice it. This, brought to its fullest, is how you must care for water and rice, as though they were your own children. It's kind of making this the same point. Is the way you care for children is saying you need to care for everything that you do. But there's this other point that he makes at the beginning, is that you keep the three jewels with the same sort of care as you would with children. And this is something I really need to reflect on. But I was just thinking about it, and how a life of responsibility. Somewhere Dogen says, if you undertake the responsibility of the cook without having some level of understanding of what he calls the way of reality, you'll just suffer. And there's something about this, like having children and taking responsibility without a greater vision is kind of just hard work. And maybe this is just me. Maybe there's people who can just get on with life and not think about it, and it's fine. Well, I need a bigger vision. I need this sense of like love for my children, but love for every other single human being. The same sort of quality, and it is a contradiction. But there's something about that contradiction that brings such richness and depth to life. And so taking responsibility for another human being and other human beings at work takes you out of yourself and matures you, I think. And if you don't, you just remain kind of stuck in your own world, and it's all about you. And even a spiritual life can become all about you, about your own growth, about your own creating your own Buddha field, which is a contradiction in terms of that doesn't work. It's so you can just remain in here, and that's kind of fine, but it's very limited. As wonderful as we all are, each individual one of us, we need. I would say we need something bigger than ourselves. Otherwise, it's all too dry and narrow and not very fulfilling, I would say. So I think I'm kind of, you've come here because you're parents and you kind of already know what I'm talking about. So I think the takeaway from me would be like, keep your values close to your heart, because that will make a difference, particularly when you're struggling. And that's when you need them the most, in a way. It's easy to keep your values in mind when you're not struggling, when everything is so easy. But when you're struggling, when there's demands, when you're responsible for other human beings, that's when you really, really need something beyond yourself. And something that I'm having to learn is, my limitations, my conditioning, my deeply ingrained conditioning from childhood, like how I was raised, has a huge impact on how I behave. And we know this, but there's some sort of deep knowledge that comes when everyone is pressing your buttons around you. You realize all of the limitations and all of your conditioning. So then I have to work on that. So that's where I'm working on becoming more aware of my conditionings and using all the possible tools that there are, using friends in particular, wiser friends, and talking to them on the phone. I started going to like a group for people who were brought up in an alcoholic environment, and before I would not at all consider that. I just thought, I just need Dharma and that's all good. But there's something about being really specific, like what is your conditioning? What is it that you keep coming up against? And if you're lucky enough and are around somebody or a group of people that can sort of point that out, that's great. But if not, then you're going to have to do a lot more work and really think like, why am I keep coming up against this thing? What is it? And once you find out, then find something that is specifically tailored to that. For me, growing up around an alcoholic family that has particular challenges, that does bring a particular sort of flavor and particular sort of ways of coping. That I realized, well, talking to other people with a similar sort of experience is hugely helpful. So it's not just all about mindfulness and meditation and ethics and wisdom and transcendental stuff. It's really nitty-gritty, everyday stuff that affects you and affects your ability, my ability to really see what the Buddha is talking about. If I just keep going to like this great text where the Buddha talks about enlightenment, it'll just be up here, because there's all this stuff that keeps not being transformed. That's what the Buddha talks about. You need the whole transformation of the whole of you being, every single bit of it. That's why the spiritual life is hard. That's why it's not just, yeah. Right, so let me just finish with what happens at the end of that little section where the Buddha gets presented with the parasols. He transformed them into this great big canopy where you can see everything. And then one of the young guys that presents a parasol, called Ratnakara, he knelt with his right knee on the ground, raised his hands, palms pressed together to salute the Buddha, and praised him with the following hymn. Pure are your eyes, broad and beautiful like lotuses. Pure is your thought, having discovered the supreme transcendence of all trances. Immeasurable is the ocean of your virtues, the accumulation of your good deeds. You affirm the path of peace. All great ascetic obeisance to you. All things arise dependently from causes, yet they are neither existent nor non-existent. Therein is neither ego nor experiencer nor doer, yet no action, good or evil, loses its effects. Such is your teaching. O Shakyamuni, conquering the powerful host of Mara, all the blockages and everything I've been talking about, you found peace, immortality, and the happiness of that supreme enlightenment. Those who are well disciplined by your precious Dharma are free of vain imaginings and always deeply peaceful. Supreme Doctor, you put an end to birth, decay, sickness, and death. Immeasurable ocean of virtue obeisance to you. Like Mount Sumeru, you are unmoved by honor and scorn. You love moral beings and immoral beings equally. Poised in equanimity, your mind is like the sky. Who would not honor such a precious jewel of a being? And that is to give you a flavor of what we are headed to. Thank you.